Okay, good morning, everybody. So, just a very brief review of how we finished off last week. We actually finished chapter one. I don't remember how long we've been working on this for, but it's definitely been a couple months for sure, several months. And it took us a while to learn chapter one. And the summary, really, the way I would sort of wrap up, what at least the way he wraps up chapter one, is he says that in the end of the day, this book that we're studying, The Path of the Just, it's a guidebook. It's different than many other Jewish philosophical works because it's really meant to be a handbook to guide us through the steps and the process of becoming a fully actualized human being. I don't know if I mentioned this in the previous discussions, but there are many great rabbis. I probably told this in the introductory class that were known to keep a copy of this book, The Path of the Just, in their tallis bag that they brought with them to shul every day, because they never let a day go by without spending some time working on this book, because this book is so fundamental and it's such a all-inclusive guide to how to get to the ultimate goal. Now, what's the ultimate goal? It's what he describes over and over again in great detail in chapter one, and it can be summarized really in one Hebrew word. And that one Hebrew word is devekut. And the meaning of that is clinging to Hashem, being attached to the Almighty in a real way, having consistent, constant spiritual awareness of our Creator and our connection to our Creator at all times. That's the ultimate goal. That's what all of Judaism is about. That's what we're here to do as human beings. And that's what Judaism is here to do, which is to teach us how to do it. To get to that place where we feel aware, conscious, and connected to the infinite Creator at all times. So what he says in the end is that in order to get there, there are steps along the way. It's a journey, and there are many levels. And what we need to do is we need to learn how to climb this ladder level by level, rung by rung. And each, I mean, I don't want to, it's kind of a spoiler alert, but there are actually 14 levels which he identifies, and we'll talk about what they are in a little bit more in a minute. But each one of these levels of consciousness or awareness or understanding could really take, in all honesty, it could take anywhere from 3 months to a lifetime to master any one of these levels, because it's not something we're going to read this book and we're going to discuss it. But the real way to approach this book, and I'm telling you this now, if you really want to maximize the opportunity of studying this book, it's to learn each chapter slowly, as we will. We'll go through each chapter slowly, and then to set aside some time to review what you've learned, not because, as he says in the introduction to the book, because he's going to tell you any large amounts of factual information that's going to be difficult to remember or retain. That's not that kind of book. But the reason why it's really important to review this book is because this book is all about internalizing the concepts, the principles, the values that he's teaching us. So you can't just read through it once and think, okay, I've got that one down, I got that level down, let's move on to the next level. So really what the ideal way to study this book is to learn each chapter slowly, to review the ideas as we're studying them. A great idea, if you're interested, is a partner. You can call that, a chavruta, a partner, or as we move along in this book, what I'm going to encourage everyone to do is to commit to small steps of growth in each of the different areas that we're studying. And one of the useful things about having a partner is that partner can help hold you accountable. We call it an accountability partner. So if you're working with somebody else, it could be somebody else that's in the group, or it could be somebody who's not in the group. And just say, hey, I'm working on taking small steps, and someone who you trust, someone who cares about you and cares about your happiness and your growth. And you commit to small steps of growth along the way. And if you do this, it's a long journey. It's a lifelong journey, but you'll see, you'll take steps back and you'll turn around and you'll say, wow, I've really come a long way. I've grown a lot as a human being. I've grown a lot as a Jew. I've grown a lot as a spiritual being who's seeking devekut, who's seeking connection and spiritual connection with my creator. So that's really what we're trying to accomplish in this book. So that's why, again, just to encourage everybody, we'll go through it slowly. I encourage everyone to spend a little bit of time reviewing the ideas and then making small commitments to growth in each one of the areas. Okay, so now this week we're actually going to start chapter 2. If you're following along in the version of the book that we have, it is chapter 40, page 43. And what we're going to do now is we're going to begin the process of looking at the 14 different levels of growth that he is going to put forth in this book. Now, some people refer to these 14 levels as midot, qualities, attributes. And in fact, some of them are qualities. Like, for example, humility is one of the attributes over here. That's obviously a quality. That's an attribute. A lot of them you could define as midot, as human character traits, positive character traits. But the truth is that these are so much more than that. So much more than just a book about good characteristics and character traits. There are books like that. There's a book called Orchot HaTzadikim, which is a book that lays out all the positive character traits that a person can have and describes them and what they are and what they mean. But this is much more than that. These are actually, the way I like to look at these 14 things, are 14 lenses, consecutive lenses through which we have the ability to see the world and to see every relationship and every interaction that we have in life. And if we can learn, and even if we don't get to all 14, but even if we get to 1 or 2 or 3, we've created lenses now that we look at the world differently. We're looking at the world in a more sophisticated way, in a deeper way, in our relationships with our spouses, in our relationships with our children, in our relationships with our friends, in the way we conduct ourselves in work, in the way we conduct ourselves as social beings. Everything that we do gets filtered through, ideally gets filtered through these lenses. And if we're able to do this to the degree that we're able to do this, and I like to use that saying, to the degree. When I use that saying, I'm borrowing from the words of the Ramchal himself in the introduction, where he made a point of saying, to the degree that one works on these things, which I think is a huge point, because to the degree means that it's obviously not all or nothing. It means that to whatever degree a person invests in acquiring these lenses or attributes or qualities, it's going to qualitatively change and affect their life for the better. So to the degree that we're able to incorporate these ideas into our lives, it's just going to mean more happiness, more success, more growth, and ultimately more fulfillment. So with each one of the 14 traits, qualities that he talks about in the book, there are 4 chapters dedicated to each one, 4 sections, let's just say, dedicated to each one. And let me tell you what the structure of this book is, the 4 chapters for each quality. So you can see in a minute, we're going to start the quality today of what's called zehirut or vigilance. Okay, we'll just start discussing that in a few minutes. So with each one of the 14 qualities or attributes, there are 4 sections. So section number 1 is a basic definition of that trait or that quality, or as I like to say, that lens. Okay, it's a basic definition, a general definition. What does this particular thing mean? What is vigilance? Okay, what is alacrity? What is cleanliness? It's not what we think it is. Okay, what is holiness? What is humility? What are these things? A basic general definition. Okay, the next section for each attribute will always be, in all 14 cases, the components or the details of that attribute. Chapter 1 for each attribute will say the general discussion. Generally speaking, what is it? The second chapter for each quality will go into the details, into the nuts and bolts of each quality. The third section for each midah will then tell us, how do we acquire that attribute? What are the things that we need to do to begin to access that attribute and to make it part of us and to acquire it? What do we do? What do we go for? What are the positive steps that we can take? And the fourth and final section of each one of the four attributes is always, what are the things that we need to look out for and avoid, the factors that can prevent the acquisition of these traits, and how do we avoid them? Okay, because a person can work hard. As we always say, it's much easier to destroy something than it is to build something. And I always think about when my kids are, building some kind of tower or something. Yosef, still, believe it or not, still likes to play with blocks on occasion. We have these cool blocks called keva blocks, and he can build the whole tower, and he can spend an hour and a half on a Shabbos afternoon building a tower. And then, when he's done, he takes one block and he throws it at the whole thing, and it's destroyed in 2 seconds. That's kind of like life, right? You can spend your whole life building and working on something, on a quality and an attribute, and then like that, you can destroy it. A relationship, you can work hard and invest for a long time in a relationship, and you can screw up once and you can destroy it. So chapter 3 is how to acquire the trait, and chapter 4 of each midah will always be, what do we need to do to avoid? What do we need to avoid to prevent us from losing our investment in each one of the traits after we've invested? Okay, so that is the basic idea of how this book works, and I want to jump into chapter 2 and the first quality, the first trait that we're going to discuss. In Hebrew, it's called zehirut, or zahirus in Ashkenazic pronunciation. And the best translation that we have for that word, and I say the best translation is because all these things are difficult to translate, but the best translation we have is vigilance. Vigilance. Okay. There's no word in English that can really completely capture what zahirus really means. Hopefully, eventually, I'll stop having to say vigilance, and I can just say zahirus, and everyone will know what I'm talking about. But that is going to be the first quality that we're going to study. Now, let's jump in and see, what does the Ramchal say on this quality. Remember, chapter 1 is always good, of each quality is always going to be the general understanding and the presentation of what the midah, what the attribute, what the quality is. So he says in the beginning, the essence of zahirus, vigilance, is that a person exercise great care in all his actions and affairs. That is, to contemplate and monitor his actions and his ways in life, to determine whether they are good or not, so that he not abandon his soul to the danger of extinction, God forbid, and not simply proceed through life following his routine like a blind man walking in the dark. Okay, that's going to be the paragraph that we're going to focus on for the next half hour. Okay, one paragraph, and let's try to understand what this means. So, generally speaking, what is zahirus? What is vigilance? So, in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, the word, if somebody like tells you, you're on the bus or something, and the door is about to close, so somebody will say, maybe the driver will say, tizaher. Tizaher, it means be careful. That's what the word zehirut means. It means being careful. That's literally what it means. It means carefulness. So it means be careful. Be careful with your words. Be careful with your actions. Be careful with your thoughts. It means having total awareness. It means, in modern contemporary pop psychology terminology, one might call this mindfulness. Okay, it's a very popular term that people use now, but really, this concept of mindfulness is outlined right here in the Ramchal. He outlined it 250 years before it became popular. It's called, this is the idea of living the examined life. Famously, Socrates was apparently claimed to have said that the unexamined life is not worth living. Okay, so what the Ramchal is talking about here in the attribute of zehirut, of vigilance, is living the examined life. Okay, so the idea is that even though we have very, very little control of what happens to us in our journey, and I think by now we all know that, right? As long as you've been on this earth for, I don't know, once you've been here for 30, 40 years, 50, 60 years for sure, we all know that we really have very, very little, ultimately very little control of what happens to us on our journey. Okay, a lot of things are happening in life and we really don't have a lot of control over it. So many outside factors are involved in everything that happens to us. But that doesn't mean that ultimately we're not going to be held accountable for the lives that we lived and the choices that we made and the consequences that we set into motion and the unlived or unrealized potential, the unlived life, unrealized potential, what we didn't actualize in our lives. We're also going to be held accountable for. I saw a cute meme today on Facebook. Someone said, I'm writing a book about all the things I should have done in my life. It's called an autobiography. Right? I think we could all write an autobiography. All the things that I ought to have done and I should have done and I didn't do. So what does it mean to have zehirut, to have this quality of vigilance? It means that if we want to succeed in life and we want to accomplish in life and we want to reach our potential and be the people that our infinite creator created us to be, we have to learn the art of introspection, self-examination, being able to learn from our mistakes, being able to look at our lives and think carefully about what we're doing, what we're saying, what our actions are, what our thoughts are, even. Okay, and I would say, that, and I'll say this many times as we study this book. It's incredible how relevant this book is. 250 years later, it's as relevant today, and arguably more relevant today than it may have ever been at any other point. Think about this. It's so easy to go through life without thinking, and easier now than ever. He's actually going to quote this a little bit later on in this chapter, but if you remember in the story of when the Jewish people were in Egypt under the brutal reign of the Pharaoh, and when the Jewish people came and Moses as their leader complained to the Pharaoh and said, we want to go. Our people want to go. We're slaves. We're done. God has said, let my people go. So what does Pharaoh do? Pharaoh says, you know what? These people have too much time on their hands. They're thinking. Once people start thinking, they start wanting to change and they want more for themselves. These people are thinking. They have too much time on their hands. So he says, okay, your quota for building bricks will remain the same, but we will no longer provide the straw that you need to build the bricks. You got to go out and get it on your own. And the Ramchal says later on in this chapter that is the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, will always make sure that you're so busy that you never have time to do what you need to do to become a better husband, a better wife, a better father, a better mother, a better friend, a better sister, a better whatever. Okay? Now, there's no time in human history that we suffer more from this than in our generation, in the generation of technology, right? Because it used to be before we checked our phones every 4 seconds to see if maybe somebody sent me a WhatsApp or maybe somebody sent me an email or maybe something, I need to know about that's going on in the world or in the Ukraine or whatever. But we used to have time, and even I remember, I'm old enough to remember a day when there used to be time where it would be quiet and we would think. Now I have to force myself. When I'm in the car, sometimes I say, okay, no radio, no podcast, nothing. I'm just going to turn everything off and I'm going to think about things in my life. I'm going to think about my relationships. I'm going to think about my wife and how I can make her happy. I'm going to think about my kids and what they need. I'm going to try to use quiet time, but it's so hard now. And that's what Zahirus means. Zahirus means finding time. And we'll see he structures it for us, how to do it. Finding time to be able to examine our lives and think about our lives. So let's go through this sentence. He said 6 things over here. He said we need to be able to first, this exercise great care in all of his actions and affairs. That is, I want to focus on this sentence. That is to contemplate and monitor his actions and his ways. Okay, so that's contemplate, mitbonein, monitor, mifakeach, ma'asav, his actions, durachav, and his ways, to see if they're tovim, if they're good, or if they're not, if they're low tovim, if they're not good. Okay, so what does he mean by this? Let's break this down slowly. So first of all, and here's where I want audience participation. Okay, contemplate. The first thing that a person has to do is he has to take great care and make sure that he has time to contemplate his actions and his ways and to monitor them. So what do we think he means when he says to contemplate his actions and his ways? And what do we think he means when he says to monitor his actions? The audience participation part of
David?
Yes.
Yeah, so.
Oh, Paula, wow. The voice changed.
I'm not even gonna go there. Okay. So when you contemplate, just don't reflexively act, especially if it's got serious consequences. You know, think about, don't let your limbic system overwhelm your right and left hemispheres. You know, use your rational thought. If someone makes you mad, before you cuss them out or give them the finger when you're driving, think about what the consequences could be before your spouse, before you upbraid your spouse or your children when they cross the line. Think about how it's going to make them feel, and monitor, meaning don't fall asleep at the wheel. I mean, this is a constant battle with the Yetzer Hara. And you can't let your guard down, because it'll always wiggle its way into your life without you knowing it, unless you have your defenses up. In other words, sort of like the Starship Enterprise, don't take the shields down. The Klingons could at any time wipe you away because they could have the cloaking device.
Okay. Good. I like the analogy. That's good. I like that. That's good. Thank you, Paula. Good, excellent. Okay, so fine, I hear what you're saying. Any other thoughts on that? The contemplate and monitor. It sounds like a 2-step process. Contemplate and monitor.
I guess in a way it means don't go through your life on automatic. Always be aware of where you are, what you are, and what you're doing.
Okay, and he's going to say that explicitly in a minute, Ben. So that's exactly what he means. But he's not. Oh, let me just remind you of one thing, that the Vilna Gaon, remember the famous line that the Vilna Gaon said about this book, that there's not a superfluous word in the first 10 chapters of this book. So we're only in chapter 2. So that means that according to the Vilna Gaon, the greatest Jewish sage of the last 500 years, there's not one extra word in this book. So he's not using synonyms over here. When he says contemplate and monitor, those words have to mean something else. He's describing a process, and it's a 2-step process. Susie.
Could it be that contemplate is think about your actions prior to doing them, and monitor is evaluate your actions after you've done them?
Excellent. Okay. So I think and we'll see in a minute, as or not probably not today, but maybe next week, that he does talk about this quality. The hero is having two distinct stages, the moment before and the moment of or after. So we'll see that might be it. I was thinking slightly differently, but more very along the lines of what you said, Susie, and that was that contemplate mitbonain to me seems like setting aside time to think about, to determine, and like you were saying, Jeffrey, rationally, intellectually, rationally determine what I want my actions and my ways to be. Determine, not emotionally, not situationally, but to determine rationally and intellectually, what do I want to do? What do I want to be like? What kind of person do I want to be? And then monitoring it is, now that I've decided what I want, I have to have a system to keep an eye on it and to monitor and watch my actions and my ways to make sure that there's not a discrepancy between the reality of my actions and my ways and what I in my contemplation I set out to be my actions and my ways. So it's a two-step process of contemplating, determining for myself rationally how I want to be in this world, and then monitoring it as having a system that you put into place to make sure that I am doing it. Okay. Now, then he says two things though. He says, you have to make sure to contemplate and monitor your actions and your ways. The Vilna Gaon, guys, no extra words in the first 10 chapters. So what are actions and what are ways? So the commentaries are there are a lot of commentaries on this book. They focus on this. What does it mean by contemplating and monitoring your actions and contemplating and monitoring your ways? So actions, I think that's straightforward, right? Our actions are the things that we do. And by the way, included in our actions, I think, are our words. Words and actions go together. So what does he mean when he says ways? Not only do we have to contemplate and monitor our actions, but we have to contemplate and monitor our ways. What could that mean, Susie? Yeah, what do you think?
That means, good.
Wait, Susie, wait, go ahead, but you're muted too.
Yeah.
Could it be his habit, your habits, your ways, the way you're used to doing things? So one way is what you do, and one way is you're used to doing it a certain way, so you keep doing it that way, even if it's not in anyone's best interest.
Okay, fine. I think that's possible. Actions, but I would say a little bit differently. Jeffrey, what were you going to say, Jeff?
Thoughts. You have to monitor your thoughts to be sure that you're not actually like putting a barrier before a blind man, that the Yetzer Hara can get in there and you could have an ulterior motive, which you're almost not even aware of. And it's getting couched as a mitzvah, but it's really for your own self-interest. So you gotta monitor your thoughts and your motivations, or you'll get fooled. You'll fool yourself.
Excellent. So I think that, and I think, I think you both said similar and related things, and I think they're both partially, I think they both make up what he means over here. Actions are actions. Actions. Yeah, Lee, Brian, who's that?
Yeah, it's Lee.
Hi, Lee.
Brian's here too.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hey.
To me, it seems that ways it really has a lot to do with the lens through which you view the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way you process your actions, right? your values, how you choose
your outlook.
Yeah, the lens through which you view the world, or your ways, your way of being in the world. And I think that what makes sense to me is you almost have to be an observer, observing yourself, which means that you kind of have to create a certain degree of distance between your thoughts, speech, and actions in order to more objectively look at what you do and who you are.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's beautiful. And I think if you put together what the three of you are saying, I think that's what ways means over here. Actions are actions. Actions are actions and words, let's say. But ways can mean, I think it means like you're saying, Lee, like your outlook, your perspective in life, your philosophy in life, your outlook in life, your pathway, the way that you're moving in this world. So actions and thoughts are actions and words are very specific. Ways means it's not just enough to monitor and contemplate and monitor what did I do today, what did I not do today, but also what are my attitudes, my thoughts, like Jeffrey said, what am I thinking about people, and what are my habits, like Susie was saying. That's all part of what we're being required to contemplate and monitor here. Mike, do you have your hand up over there?
Yeah, I was just gonna add on, like the ways, maybe the way we do our actions. Like somebody asks you for a help, your spouse asks you to do something, you agree to do it, you do it, but you do it begrudgingly with a bad attitude, aggravated and not with an open heart and stuff like that. I guess would make the analogy of the same thing with the mitzvahs, right? If you're doing them but you're inside not feeling good about them and you're doing it, begrudgingly, that's not in the spirit.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it's a deeper level. It's what's behind. It's the thoughts and the motivation behind your actions. Meaning, my actions might be. I've monitored, contemplated, and monitored my actions, and they might be good as in a vacuum. But what's behind them? Is it that I'm looking for honor? Is it that I'm looking for recognition? Is that there could be all kinds of negative motivations to what could theoretically be a positive action. Yeah. Mike, you look like
David,
you're
Rabbi David, the other thing we're minimizing, I think, a little bit about actions, because actions is a lot more than actions. We talk about the degree, right? So what about the degree of our action? There's small action, there's big action, there's spreading action, there's having other people take the action, there's influencing action. So action is a lot bigger than we're saying it is.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right, and that's right. And I think that as he goes through this more, he's going to really dig into what it means to monitor our actions. And I think you're right. It's not a simple thing at all. There's definitely a lot of parts and components to what that means, and which is really why we could spend a year probably just on this one quality of vigilance. And by the way, we might. So we'll see how it goes.
And are your actions tailor-made for your needs and where you are now, or is this something that you could generalize to everybody
Okay, so
else?
I think there's some of both. I think there's general rules about actions, but then obviously, sometimes people ask me questions, what do you think about, somebody asked me the other day, what do you think about going to an intermarriage? And I said, every single situation in that relates to that question is going to be different. There are no two situations of going to an intermarriage that have ever been the same. You can't just ask me in general, what do you think about going to an intermarriage? I would have to know so many details in order to really understand what is the right thing and what's not right thing. So generally, there are general rules and principles of actions, but obviously layers and layers of details based on situations. Yeah.
No,
I
but
just want to finish the last two. Wait, hold on one second. I just want to finish the last two words in this sentence. So we said that a person has to contemplate and monitor. So we got that down. His actions and his ways. And then he says to determine whether they are good or not. Now, we are very fortunate because we've been studying the path of the just for quite a while. And we actually have a way of defining good. Does anybody remember very precisely what is the definition of good? Because he says we have to contemplate and monitor our actions and our ways in life to determine whether they are good or not good. Does anybody remember how the Ramchal defined for us good?
consistent with Hashem's will.
Okay, close. Turn back to page 25 for 1 second, if you have it. And right there in the middle of the page 25, The Ramchal quoted for us from the words of King David, David HaMelech, in Psalm 73. And he says here just 5 Hebrew words which change everything. Okay, and these are the words: Va'ani kirvas Elokim li tov, which means, but as for me, as far as I'm concerned, closeness to God is good. Okay, so along the lines of what Jeffrey was saying, good, as defined by the Ramchal, borrowing from the definition of King David, is anything that will bring me closer, that will connect me more profoundly, with more depth to my Creator, is good. Anything which will bring me further away from that connection and that relationship is not good. Okay, so now we have this first sentence. We have to contemplate, meaning set aside time to think about our lives and what we want and what we don't want, intellectually, rationally. And we have to monitor, actually paying close attention to our actions. What are ma'asav udrachav, our actions and our ways. And we spoke about that a lot. And we have to determine if they're tov, good, or if they're low tov. If they're good, go for it. Go for it and do as much of it and get as much of it as you possibly can. And if they're not good, if they're low tov, run away from it. Stay far, far away from it, as far away as you possibly can. Okay, and that's what the Ramchal has set up for us over here. So that is our basic definition that we're going to work with moving forward of vigilance. To think about our lives, what we want, what's right. We have to decide what we want to do and what we don't want to do. And then we have to monitor ourselves. We need some sort of system, which he's going to give us, a system of cheshbon hanefesh, spiritual accounting, to be able to make sure that once we've decided what we want to do and what we don't want to do, that we're actually sticking to it. And we have to make sure that we're focusing on not only our actions, but also our outlook, our perspective, and our lenses, and how we look at the world. We have to make sure that they're leading us closer to Hashem and not leading us away from Hashem. Okay, so that's the first part. And then the second part, he says, so that he not abandon his soul to the danger of extinction, God forbid, and not simply proceed through life following his routine like a blind man in the dark. So what does it mean to abandon our souls to distinction? It sounds pretty ominous. Whoa, abandon our souls to distinction. So I think what he's talking about over here, we're all familiar with the idea of our defaults, our default position. Okay? In life, we have defaults, our go-to, where we automatically go to in life. What is our default in terms of how we are sort of wired or programmed to react and to deal with situations? The automatic reaction, the automatic default. So what is the automatic default of a person? Meaning, is our default position to align ourselves with and to pursue and run after the wants, needs, desires of our bodies? Or is our default position to align ourselves with, to run after and pursue the wants, needs, and desires of our souls? Because as we spoke about a lot in the first chapter, those are very different. The wants, needs, and desires of the body are actually more often than not opposite of the wants, needs, and desires of the soul. So what's our default position as human beings? How are we wired? Are we wired in such a way where our natural, all things left alone, we're naturally going to gravitate towards the desires of our body, or we're naturally going to gravitate towards the desires of our soul? But I think the Ramchal is answering that question for us. He says that if we're not paying attention, if we're not contemplating, if we're not monitoring our actions and our ways, if we're not practicing this quality of zehirut, of vigilance, and we haven't trained ourselves in this area, then the default, the automatic is that we are abandoning our souls to the danger of extinction, meaning that it's going to be 10 times out of 10 the desires, wants, needs of the body that is going to win the day in the war between the body and the soul. Okay, so the reason why we have to contemplate and monitor our actions and our ways is because if we don't, the default becomes following after the desires of the body and the soul. If we're not actively, proactively, and consciously working hard to determine what we want for ourselves, how do we express the desires, needs, and wants of our soul in this world, if we're not working to actively figure that out and to stick to a plan to make sure that we go in that direction, then we will 100% of the time follow after the desires, wants, and needs of our body. And by doing so, we're abandoning the soul, so to speak. Yes, Susan. Susan, you're muted.
He says he's
Go ahead.
abandoning our soul. Oh.
Yeah.
You're abandoning our souls to extinction. That's the quote. But I thought our souls were eternal. So if their souls are eternal, how could they become extinct? Is that just a verbiage or a way of saying
It's a
it?
verbiage. It's a verbiage, and I wouldn't have even translated that. I mean, I guess kind of levilti azov nafsho l'sekanat avadon. It means abandoning our souls to the danger of being lost. It doesn't mean that the soul gets destroyed. It just means that we become completely disconnected from it.
Thank you.
David?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a country song by Randy Travis, very back home type of guy, and he sums it up in there's always a conflict between what feels good and what feels right. I mean, that's simplifying it, but
Randy Travis apparently has been studying the Ramchal late at night when no one.
that is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I think that I would like to suggest that I send this song and everybody write a little bit about the song as it relates to the Ramchal. Because there's
That's a great idea. I think a better idea is to call Randy Travis and see if we can get him to come on to class one day.
you can get a day off.
And tell us what.
No, but I mean, it's a country song and it's got a scenario, but it doesn't give the answer to what this person does. And I think it's fascinating.
That's
And we can actually look at it.
It is. That's definitely the idea over here. Okay, so I want to give you an analogy, and I want to try to we're going to wrap it up in a few minutes, but an analogy would be like this: two different people that purchase a business or take over a business. Okay, actually, funny, I wrote this down before Shabbos, and then on Shabbos I met somebody who stayed by us actually, who fit perfectly into one of these categories. So the first category is somebody who takes over a very successful business, which has been a very successful business for years, and the business basically runs itself. This guy that we had over for Shabbos, he took over a family business, and he said all he has to do is collect the checks at the end of the month. Otherwise, the business runs itself. Like that sounds like a good gig. Okay, so that's it. That's all he has to do. The business completely runs itself. Yeah, he's got to keep an eye on it and make sure, no major changes take place, and nothing really gets changed in terms of the marketplace or whatever, but it runs steady and smooth, and it provides a constant flow of income. It just has to collect the checks at the end of the month. That's one business that a person might purchase or acquire or inherit. And then there's another type of business, which you could probably get for a lot less. And that is like a family business that's a total wreck. It's a mess. The business is set up poorly. It's a total disaster. Everything is wrong. The product is wrong. The marketing is bad. The staff, the people, everything is wrong. But he feels the person maybe buys this business because it's a deal. It's a good deal. It's cheap. And he feels like, he can rebuild the business. he can recreate the business and create something awesome about it. Okay. So now, if you think about the first business, the first model, the first example, the default is all you have to do is not screw it up. Right? I'm giving you this business. Just don't screw it up. You don't have to do anything really. Just don't screw it up. Don't actively. If you leave it alone, it'll run itself. It'll provide constant revenue, and it'll be a good business. It'll be healthy. Just don't make any decisions, no choice, and don't mess it up. Okay, that's the default. The default is it's going to run fine. It's going to run great. It's going to be successful. The second business is the default. If you don't do anything, the business is going to go out of business. It's going to run into the ground. Everything, every single step, every piece needs to be carefully monitored, contemplated and monitored, rebuilt, recreated. The default in that situation is the company goes bankrupt. Okay. So if you think about a human being, there are two distinct periods in human history. There's mankind before Adam and Eve made the choice to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, at which point, prior to that fateful day, prior to that fateful day, human beings, the natural default position of a human being was aligned with the desires, wants, and yearnings of the soul. Okay, so it's kind of like that first business, where as long as you don't screw it up, as long as you let it alone and don't do anything to change it, it's going to be successful. That's how we were built. That was Adam and Eve before the sin. But what happens after Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Our whole understanding of ourselves, our whole identity shifts, and we no longer identify ourselves as a soul with a body, but we now are much more likely to identify ourselves as a body. And if we're lucky and we're spiritually focused, we might add on that has a soul. Okay, so Adam in the post-sin era, post-eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, is like the second business. That's the reality that we find ourselves in. We now can't rely on our default. We can't just say, you know what, I'm a good person. I'm going to do the right thing 9 times out of 10. We're not. We're not. 9 times out of 10, or actually 10 times out of 10, if you don't contemplate and monitor your actions and your ways, ultimately your default will be you are going to follow after the desires, needs, and wants of your body. You're going to run the business into bankruptcy, and you're not going to succeed in the challenge and the purpose of life, which is to draw close to Hashem. Okay, so that's it. And then he finishes off with this sentence and with this line, and we're going to analyze this last line, and then we're going to stop. Almost done here. And he says we have to do this because otherwise we're putting our souls in danger of distinction, God forbid, or being lost. And we have to make sure that we do not simply proceed through life following his routine like a blind man walking in the dark. Okay, so here what he means is that, this is like what Susie was saying before, that habit and routine is the enemy of growth and human development and self-development and actualization. Okay, so if we just go ahead and follow our habits and our routines, we know we will never become the people that we have the potential to become. But I have a question over here. And this is a very, very deep and powerful point that I think the Ramchal is making. He says in this last line, otherwise we're going to be like a blind man walking in the dark. Okay, now, if you are blind, God forbid, does it matter if it's light or dark outside? But what does that mean, a blind man walking in the dark? That's like the weirdest phrase I've ever heard. Just say a blind man. Once he's blind, I hate to say it, but it doesn't matter if he's walking in the dark or he's walking in the light. Either way, he can't see. So the truth of the matter is that the Ramchal is not making up that term, not making up that phrase. He's borrowing it from a verse in Deuteronomy, where it describes in Deuteronomy what our experience in the exile will look like, and it says we'll be like a blind man groping in the dark. But what is this saying? What's the depth? And why does he borrow the terminology from Deuteronomy and employ it over here?
There will be no help.
Isn't it, Chris, if it's light out, somebody can at least see him and avoid him, but if it's dark, people that can see won't even see him.
Beautiful, beautiful. So let me tell you, the Talmud, there's a rabbi in the Talmud, his name is Rabbi Yossi Bar Chalafta. And Rabbi Yossi Bar Chalafta says in the Talmud that I was bothered by this verse in Deuteronomy for so long. Blind man groping in the dark. If he's blind, what difference does it make? Whether it's dark or light, it makes no difference. He can't see. He said he was bothered by that terminology that the Torah uses. He said that until one day he saw a blind man walking down the street holding a torch at night. And he said, he went over to the blind man and he said, sir, with all due respect, you're blind. So why are you holding a torch? You can't see anything. And he said, so long as I carry the torch, then other people can see me and help me to make sure I avoid stepping into a pit or stumbling over a stumbling block. Okay, so the terminology of a blind man groping in the dark means something very deep. Hold on, Lee, 1 second. I'm going to come to your question. 1 second. I think this is what the Ramchal is trying to tell us, that if we don't live the examined life, meaning if we don't contemplate and monitor our thoughts and our actions and our words, but rather we just go ahead and follow our habits and our routines, not only will we be blind to the pitfalls and the stumbling blocks of life, but other people will not be able to help us either. Our loved ones, our friends, the people who care about us will see us walking into the stumbling block, walking into a pit, about to destroy our lives, about to make a terrible decision in life, and they will be helpless from helping us. Why? Because we won't listen to them. We won't want to hear anything they have to say. We're so certain that everything's fine, because we're like that blind man groping in the dark. Everything is fine. We won't be open to help, to people who are reaching out to us. Right? We think about in life how many times we've known people, whether it was a loved one, someone we cared about, a close family member or a friend, who was making bad decisions and going in a really bad direction, even if it's just a simple thing like a health thing. You know, you see somebody who they're not exercising and they're not eating right, and you know that they're heading in a bad direction in terms of their own health. And you try to tell them, you know what? You got to be careful. You really need to try to exercise a little bit every day, or eat a little bit better. And if you don't, I'm fine. And the next thing you know, God forbid, they're suffering from, you know, some serious health issue. So if a person is not contemplating and monitoring their lives, then not only will they be heading headlong into the pitfalls and stumbling blocks of life, but nobody else will be able to even help them. They'll be like a blind person in the dark. At least a blind person in the light, or a blind person with a torch, other people can help him. But this is much worse. It's worse than a blind person. It's a blind person in the dark. Not only is he going towards total destruction, but nobody else will be able to help him at all. That's what the Ramchal is telling us over here. Okay, that's the end of what I wanted to focus on. And Lee, I don't know if it's Lee or Brian, one of you guys have a question over there.
Hi, Rabbi. It's Brian. I don't know. We're getting feedback, but I have a definition of Devakis that I believe I wrote down from Rabbi Daniel Katz at Elevation in Jerusalem. That is, I think that I want to share with the group because I think it ties in a lot of what you talked about today, and it's such a difficult concept. He says Devakis is a psychological mechanism whereby we elevate our consciousness out of its animalistic, desired, focused ego state up to its highest divine source. And by holding our awareness there, we are able to experience Hashem's infinite light, power, radiance, and beauty, as well as our very own.
Wow.
Wow.
That is absolutely spectacular. You need to share that with us. Can you email that to me? I'll send it out with the recording. That's an incredible definition. Beautiful.
I think it's
Wow.
beautiful. So I'll share it with you by email now. Thank you. Thanks for today.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. I see Les or Adrian maybe there. Somebody has a hand up.
You know it's less.
Hi, Les.
The thought.
You're only speaking for yourself, not for Adrian, right?
Never would I presume to speak for Adrian. The torch is
Go ahead.
really a metaphor for an attitude, a willingness on the part of an individual to go beyond their self, their own ego, in looking for purpose and direction. In other words, to carry a torch,
Saying that
for a blind person to carry
Go
a
ahead.
torch, you could say that we're all blind, whether or not we're vision impaired, but the torch represents our intention on looking for direction that goes beyond our personal ego.
Right. Exactly. And that's why it's much worse to be a blind person in the dark, because a blind person with a torch is at least saying, I know that, the metaphorically, I might be going in the wrong direction. I might be making bad choices, but at least I'm aware enough, that awareness, and I realize that I need other people to help me and to be there for me. And the blind person in the dark is so gone and so lost that nobody's going to even be able to help that person. He's not reaching out and he's not open to other people. Unsolicited advice almost never succeeds, because if a person's not open to hearing from other people, then nothing's going to penetrate.
And for those of us who are sighted, there are elements, there's a way of looking at what we do in life as being a blind person. In effect, what this is saying is, it's a symbol of our intention to reach out and to look for that advice and counsel.
Yep, absolutely.
David?
Yeah.
David, yeah. So there are three things that come to mind in the secular world that refers to that. None is so blind as he who will not see. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. And the dark ages were not dark since there was no light. It was because people refused to see.
Beautiful. Where'd you come up with those?
Well, the first is just out there. When the student is ready, the teacher appears is from Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And The Dark Ages is a book by Michelin, I think, about the Dark Ages.
I lost you, Jeff.
Really, David,
Lizzie, did
this
you have
is
to,
very-
were you
this
going to
is
say
very-
something?
yeah, this is, I realize this is very negative, but I guess it's the opposite of what we want to be. So maybe that's okay. I looked at it as you're going to be a blind man. That's someone who has does no Torah study, somebody who's totally alienated from who he is. And walking in the dark is in a corrupt, dark society. So if we don't study our Torah and improve our society, we're going to be a blind man walking in the dark.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right.
It's pretty scary.
It is pretty scary. That's why we need to, work on these things for ourselves.
Is it significant, David, that it switched from our spiritual self to our animal self in less than one day? I mean, you're sort of making it like there were like a long time that Adam and Eve were in the garden flourishing. It was within one day.
That's right. I mean, it was.
So,
It didn't take very long.
and is the goal to get back to that non-reflective, you don't, or was the idea to have this constant battle, to toil at it?
No, the idea is to get back to it. That's exactly the idea. The idea is to get back to it, and that's our avoda. That's our work. That's what we're trying to do now. It's all about trying to get back to that place.
Yeah, but my understanding is you can't get back to it without the Mashiach coming. That we
Well,
don't have that
that's the
capability.
process.
Okay,
That's
so
where it
we're
ends. That's when we get back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go back to the cross-reference,